Hi, everyone. I'm Candid Stanisci. Thank you for joining us. And this is CFL Talk. Welcome to all of you. And you're watching here the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. You can also watch these episodes on Candid Stanisci, 10:30 on YouTube. Now on CFL Talk, joining me is, of course, David Morassutti. David, how you doing, buddy?
Doing pretty good.
Wow. Well, it's quite an interesting situation that's developing here. We're coming to the end of the Canadian Football League season. The playoff situation still has a couple of outstanding results we're waiting for to figure out where teams will be and who they'll play, who will be home, and all that stuff. So it's going right to the last week of the season.
It is, and it's very rare. I don't remember the last time we went into a season where so much needed to be decided in the final week of the year, especially the West.
Yeah.
It's usually the East. There's a little bit of and something needs to be sorted out. This is the first time where the East is all done. But yeah, I'm excited that there's going to be something to watch and there's something to play for in the final week. It usually doesn't happen.
Yeah, and well, if we look at the standings, I mean, you've got a situation where you could have. It's still possible that Saskatchewan could finish first. It's also possible that it could change the way the season's going to go, because I'm not sure which team, if you're BC, you would rather meet. It kind of doesn't matter, right? Because whichever team you meet, you're still going to have to beat the other team.
Yeah.
So that kind of conversation is kind
pick your poison.
Yeah. And it's just a question of when you're poison. If you really believe, if BC believes that, and they had some luck this year against Winnipeg, and they've had some bad luck against Winnipeg. Saskatchewan is a team that I think is the best team in the West right now, if we go by trending and by the way things have been going recently.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is it's no easy task. Like if we're looking at BC's case, it's no easy task to have to win 2 games to get to the Grey Cup, right? Montreal did it last year. We know that. 1-1 at home and 1-1 on the road. But to win 2 road games is even tougher. But I mean, if these weekends games showed us anything, maybe it's a little too. It might be really hard to really predict what's going to happen in the West, because each team has gone through some different things over the last few games, the last few weeks, that makes me wonder. Okay, like are we sure that what we've seen is what's actually going to happen? Because I can't say that.
This has been the Western Division. I don't think has been this inconsistent. I don't remember in recent memory that to have as a whole. I mean, as a whole, because even Calgary, that sits on the bottom of the standings today, had a good start to their season.
Yeah,
and a terrible start. They improved. BC has been up and down from the very beginning. Saskatchewan looked like world beaters and then had a bit of a pause. And we all know Winnipeg had a horrible start, and up until they'd already won, 8 in a row.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you look at the past, how many years we were talking about it. I mean, ever since I joined you on the show, we talked about how the West was the class of the CFL.
Absolutely.
Nobody could beat the Western teams from the East.
The crossover was always a concern.
Now it's the East is caught up. The West is I think what it is too is the teams you don't expect to be bad in the West are now unfortunately a bit bad, right? I guess pre Michael, when Michael Riley was with Edmonton, they were really good. Obviously, contenders when and things like that. Calgary was the class of the league, but then Winnipeg stepped up, Saskatchewan stepped up, and they've been up and down. BC has been the one, obviously, that's taken the big push up, right? No one for the longest time they weren't really in this position. So I just think we've seen so much change happen in the guard, right? And even Winnipeg. We're wondering if Winnipeg was even going to make it this year, and then they found a way. But it's been one of those years where you have in the East you had two teams who finished with double digit of wins. Likely in the West, two teams again. In the past, three teams in the West would finish with double digits in wins. Right? We've seen, you know, teams go. I'm trying to remember. Like I think Saskatchewan year was like 15-3 or something like something like really good to be first in the West, and then Winnipeg was just behind them, and they were the ones that ended up going to the Grey Cup. Actually, Winnipeg would be another potential look at when you're thinking about teams that went through a tough road. When they went to their first Grey Cup in 2019, they had to win 2 games to get there. So again, we've come to learn that it's going to be spectacular because there's a lot of you can say who you think is going to win, but it could be a totally different result.
Yeah, well, if you look, in the past, I'll say the past 10, 12 years, Winnipeg's won a Grey Cup, Saskatchewan's won a Grey Cup, BC's won a Grey Cup, Calgary's won a Grey Cup. The only team that hasn't in the West is Edmonton. Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa have all won Grey Cups in the past decade plus a little bit. Hamilton's the only team that hasn't won a Grey Cup. So, every team's had its moment in the sun, except for the two that we mentioned, one in each division. And in this season, though, it has been the kind of season where, if you're an Argo fan, and we cover the Argos, so I'll just say as somebody who's followed the Argos very closely, this is a team that last year dominated everybody. And then the playoffs rolled around and they just seemed to, I don't know, they forgot how to play football, it seemed. This year, on the other hand, the opposite is true. They're getting hot at the end of the season, which, if you use Montreal, recent memory, of course, last season, that's an important thing. Winnipeg is not rolling that hot. I would say Saskatchewan's the team that's rolling into the playoffs hot in the Western Division, and I would say Toronto's the team in the Eastern Division. We're going to have that theory of, if you're hot at the end of the year, you could make it to the Grey Cup and win the Grey Cup. We'll find out if that's the case. Montreal, the problem with Montreal is that they don't have to win right now. In fact, winning doesn't get them anything. So we've got that situation that the Argos were having last year, and we're going to find out if Montreal can do what Toronto didn't do, and that's overcome, the lack of drive, if you will, at the end of the game, the lack of feeding momentum. We're going to find out how important that is. And you remember when we did all the interviews with at the Grey Cup, prior to the Grey Cup, the Eastern Final, it was all about momentum. Montreal talked about the momentum they had, how they, at the end of the year, they were undefeated. We're going to find out how important that is this year in both the East and West.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at these weekend's games, one team looks like they're hitting their stride at the right time. The other one looks like they're stumbling a bit, right? BC, I don't know if you want to talk about the games, but like Toronto.
Of course, yes. Let's talk about the games. We're just doing a little.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's good because I think you're right with this, but when you look at the context of the games, Toronto had something to play for, and
They
show
did.
what they could do. Montreal had nothing to play for, but they were going up against a team who technically still didn't have anything to play for except a quarterback who had a lot to play for. Right?
Absolutely.
So, but these weekend's games, I mean, it started with the first one with Calgary and Hamilton, which unfortunately two teams who literally have nothing to play for other than pride and jobs.
Yeah, and giving their fans hope, because that's what these games are, right? They're just an opportunity to say, well, this team's a lot better than not making the playoffs, which is what you hope can be said, by any team, for that matter, not just Hamilton and Calgary, but they're looking for some positives. Matthew Schultz came in for Calgary. I don't think you could say he had an outstanding game. I don't know. It was a pedestrian kind of game where he did enough, but didn't no TDs, didn't protect the ball enough, threw an interception. Calgary's a team in rebuild mode, and they know it.
They're a team that's got a lot more questions than answers right now. What are they doing? And I mean, namely at the quarterback position. What are you going to do at quarterback? What are you going to do? Just in a lot of different situations because, man, like I don't know. I don't know. Like, okay, the defense wasn't good. The offense, like, there's no one area. Okay, if you fix this is a good team. It's one of those where maybe it's a little bit of a humbling experience for Calgary because usually everything is going right. Now it's almost like you kind of pick your poison on what you want to deal with first if you're Dave Dickinson. And the real question is, and I don't like to put this out here because I respect what Dave Dickinson has been able to do through his career, but do you have the question of whether Dave Dickinson is the right person for the job? And do you maybe potentially go with a scenario similar to Orlando in Hamilton? You want to be a GM or do you want to be a coach? Don't know if you should be doing both.
Absolutely.
That's not to say he can't do it, but right now, I would say he can. It's unlikely he should. It's not. I don't think it makes sense for him to be doing both based on the results that have happened so far.
What we do know about organizations, organizations like Calgary, all right, that I'll be blunt. Organizations like Calgary that whether, people want outside of Calgary want to say it, they can. But what I can say is that Calgary's a team that's always expecting to win.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a as a dream sequence. I'm not. This isn't something. It's not a dream sequence that I'm describing. I'm describing that in Calgary, they are traditionally a winner. This is an uncomfortable position, obviously for the fans, right? Obviously. But I think it's an uncomfortable position for the whole Calgary organization. And the whole Calgary organization, I think, has the depth of mind and the leadership above the GM and the coach. They have in their mind, I believe this is in their mind, they have an obligation to put a winner on the field. I just don't think of Calgary any other way. This is not to suggest that not every team wants to win, but I'm not talking about wanting to win. Again, this isn't a dream sequence we're talking about. This is a team that has gone, a couple of decades being a winner, and now they find themselves in a strange place. And as you said, the questions are going to start about coaching and general manager. We know one thing that's true. Calgary and Dickinson has to take responsibility for this as the coach and the GM, that he doesn't have a quarterback that they can put out there that can win them football games or enough football games. And that to me is the biggest problem that the Calgary organization has to deal with. I think the mayor experiment is over. I just don't see how they can truck him out again. This is not a personal thing. I'm not making any personal commentary on him as a person, but as a quarterback, he's not the right fit in Calgary. Calgary can't seem to build around him. And we know, David, when they bring a quarterback in football, you have to build the team around the quarterback, build the offense around the quarterback. You can insulate the quarterback by having an incredible defense like Kansas City yesterday won a football game when their quarterback made a couple of decent plays, but really the offense was non-existent. And you need that, right? You need that. You can get away with a quarterback that isn't so good, but the defense can cover. And the irony here is, and David, this is the big irony. The big irony is they played Hamilton. And guess who was under center in Hamilton? The guy they dumped, they walked away from because they felt they had the next Calgary quarterback. And that guy threw 5 touchdowns against 1 interception.
Well, and not only do they feel they had a quarterback, they also feel like, why are we going to go out and pay for a quarterback? Right? Maybe it's just one of those situations where they felt, let's go with a bit of a reset and get a little younger and maybe add some flexibility. Unfortunately, it's not exactly foolproof. And look, that's not to say that Bo Levi Mitchell has left Calgary and has had amazing success in Hamilton, right? Like,
no, that's not what we're saying,
right? But like, I looked at that game yesterday. Okay, Hamilton's offense looked incredible, except for the fact that a few weeks ago, when Hamilton was eliminated from the playoffs, I'm just going to go back for a second here. I'm going to look back.
Go ahead.
A few weeks ago here, and when Hamilton last played before playing against the Stampeders, they lost 31-10 against Winnipeg. Really good team.
Not a crime.
That quarterback that we were talking about was replaced by Taylor Powell at one point. Hamilton then after the game, and look, I'm all for trying to find some positives and some bright lights. They were celebrating Mr. 5,000 because Bo Levi Mitchell threw for 5,000 yards. I think if you were to ask Bo Levi Mitchell what he would rather have, would he rather have the 5,000 passing yards and likely going to be the only I will be the only quarterback to throw for 5,000 yards this season? Would he rather have that, or would he rather be playing in the playoffs?
I think that's a no-brainer.
And funny enough, he would have had way more yards if he didn't get benched.
Yeah, and this is why this is the other part of the irony of the game being played between Hamilton and Calgary. Calgary was reminded about the good that Bo Levi can do, but the bottom line is, to your point, and to extend on what you're saying, Hamilton were playing from a position of they're not going to make the playoffs. And they had this quarterback all year. And why were there problems with Bo Levi Mitchell? His inability to stay healthy all year. That's not a blame on Bo Levi. It's his age. The older you get, the more prone you are to having injuries, to being injured. And this was the reason, the reason why Calgary stepped away from Bo Levi Mitchell. It was because of injuries, and was because they didn't think they could get in the playoffs with him under center. Hamilton has found out that's true. The last couple of years, they found that out to be true. Again, that's why the irony of him 5 touchdowns and 1 interception, because that's one game. All it doesn't do anything to change the decision. Irony again. Doesn't change the decision that Calgary made and Dickinson made back then It doesn't change it into a mistake because Bo Levi Mitchell wasn't leading the league in passing yards and on his way to the playoffs and maybe a Grey Cup. That's it. The great numbers he has stand alone. And to your point, would he prefer to be in the play? Of course. Of course. It's been so long since he's been a legitimate starter in the playoffs, right? It's been a long time since he's been in a position where, he can make a difference in the playoffs. And David, nobody has to tell you and I that if you're a football player, you're looking forward to playing the big game. That's what you want to do. That's what you play for. That's what you're there for. If you're not playing the big game, you're waiting to figure out how you can end up there the next year. That's what it's all about. That's what it's about with Calgary. It's about getting to the big game. And they can't regret Bo Levi Mitchell. My point is you can't regret the fact that they walked away from Bo Levi Mitchell. The problem is the guy they walked away for is not the guy they hoped that he'd be. And I believe this as well. I believe that this doesn't mean Meyer can't be a great quarterback. He just can't be I think in Calgary right now. He's just he needs a change himself. It's not just about Calgary walking away from him. I think it's also him walking away from Calgary. I think those two parties, it doesn't do any good for them to be together anymore. There's no reason to think that that's going to work. They've had plenty of time to prove either way that one needs the other and the other needs the one. I don't see these two staying together. I see a change for Calgary. And it could go as far as a new GM and a new coach because Calgary likes to win. We're going to find out how loyal they are to their head coach and GM.
That's true. No, I think you're totally right on that. And what I also think when you look at Calgary's situation, it's okay. They're going to take the offseason to figure out their quarterback situation, but you made that mistake once. You've already made the wrong choice once. What's to say that Dickinson deserves the second chance to get it right? I mean, I think it makes sense. Maybe you give him one last try, but I mean, he's going to have a talk with the ownership group, and I'm sure John Hufnagel, I mean, he's still sticking around. He's probably going to be in there, and he's going to have to explain why he's the right choice to go out and try to fix the mistakes he made. I think I always say if you've got good people in the building, you don't let them through. And we know that Dave Dickinson has had success for Calgary in the past, but I mean, you also need to understand that in this league, you don't get unlimited chances.
No.
Especially in Calgary, where if you're not winning, fans are not going to come and support. And the support means everything for Calgary.
It sure does. Well, they have high expectations, and they've earned those high expectations.
Yes.
They're a great organization, and let me frame that a little more and justify what I'm saying. Okay, let's go team by team, and I'll make my point. Winnipeg, you're not changing that coach. That coach at the beginning of this year, they could have fired him early in the season and made a mistake and fired him. They could have done that. So there is truth to having a great coach who might have a blip, but you notice it. Saskatchewan brought in a new guy. The team has totally changed. They're now in a position where they could finish first, right? They're in a position they could finish first. BC has the same coach they've had the past few years, and they're they're up and down. They're not trending in a good way. Edmonton got rid of a guy who in Jones was a Grey Cup winner, but it wasn't working. He wasn't working. They got rid of him, and Edmonton turned things around a little bit. Jarius Jackson, first head coaching job, he made a difference, a positive difference, right? I don't know whether it was the change, that they did better because of the change. We're talking about Calgary. Montreal, they brought in a coach that was coaching Edmonton, and Edmonton was playing terribly. Goes to Montreal, finds a situation, wins a Grey Cup. Toronto, Dinwiddie, from the moment that he came to Toronto, improved the chances. The promise was kept. What was Pinball's promise that he made? We want to be in the mix every year for the Grey Cup. Well, guess what? If you consider the fact that they made it all the way to the East Final and lost a big game in a record-breaking year, they recovered a season that was not going so well. They're in the mix again. They're in the mix for the Grey Cup. They were in the mix last time for the Grey Cup. New coach. Ottawa, they bring in a new coach. Things improve for them. Hamilton, they brought in a new coach. Things were really bad, and they improved for them. My point is real simple. Using what we see with every team, the majority of the teams have had to make change to get change. And one of the big changes they have to make is the head coach. If the head coach can't motivate the team they have, it doesn't matter what kind of general manager you have. That's the lesson I learned looking at the standings and looking at all the coaches over just the past couple of years. You know when a coach is a winner. I'm a firm believer of it. You don't have to wait 5-6 years to figure out whether a coach is a winner. Dinwiddie proved that. The head coach in Montreal proved that, right? So I think if Calgary's looking around and smelling the coffee, they're going to say, well, maybe it's time for us to make that move. Everybody else has had to when they run into a dry spell. Maybe we have to too. And that doesn't mean that there's no job waiting for Dickens. He could be the GM or he could go elsewhere. But that's life. It's about winning. And I just don't see Calgary as a patient organization and a fan base that's going to say, let's send this out again next year. I just don't see it.
I don't see it either. But I also wonder, because of how long Dickinson has been there, do they say, look, there's two thoughts to this. They can say, well, Dickinson's been here for a long time. He's gotten us he's got a track record. The other question they should be asking themselves, if we were to let Dave Dickinson go, if we think that that's the right move, what's the follow-up move? Who are we replacing him with? And I think a lot of times teams do that without thinking of the alternative.
Right.
Right?
I agree.
Toronto wasn't making the changes that they made back in 2019 or 2018, I guess. Well, no, it's 2019. 2019, they weren't getting rid of Jim Pop as the general manager if Pinball wasn't on board.
Right.
Pinball had to come on board before they made that move.
Right.
That's what you need to do in any sporting decision. Like, part of me is, when teams go, we are letting X person go, and we're going with an interim person, especially early in the year, it's like you went into the season knowing you probably a change was likely to happen or probably should have happened. You didn't make the move. Now you're realizing you should have made the move. Now you don't have really a plan of what's next, so you're going to do an interim plan.
So what are you saying? That Calgary's going to wait till they're desperate? And like if they...
No, I think at Calgary, if they're going to make a move, they better think about it sooner rather than later.
Say to Dickinson, what do you want to be? You want to be the GM or the coach? Which do you want?
Like, personally, that's what I think they need to do. They need to have that conversation with him.
You want to stay in the organization, tell us what you want to do.
Yeah.
And then if he doesn't want to give up one of those positions, then you say, well, you want all or nothing? Well, guess what it is? You're left with nothing. They have to make a tough decision. It's an organization that deserve to do what's right for the organization. They've treated their personnel great in Calgary. We've never heard any kind of issue with personnel. If anything, it is probably one of the most consistent personnel groups that we've seen in the Canadian Football League. Unfortunately, it's not working right now, and they have to figure out why it isn't working. They've got a guy sitting on their sideline right now that they can make the head coach. It's a guy who a lot of teams wanted to be the head coach. And, even though it's special teams, we've got a guy in Winnipeg who proved he could be a good head coach. A lot of people talk about it has to be an offensive guy or a defensive guy. And before the head coach of Winnipeg had his success, special team coaches weren't given that much consideration. but we've got Dice in there in Ottawa. So there's a distinct possibility that they can raise a guy, and that's what I think they should do. I think Dickinson should take a bit of a sword. He should fall on half a sword. I'm going to be the GM. Now we're going to bring a young guy here, a new voice, and have him be the head coach of the Calgary Stampeders. That's what I think they should do, and I'm not too unconvinced that that's what they will do.
So a big one here for me is Ryan Dinwiddie was a quarterbacks coach, became a head coach. Usually that's very unheard of in any sport. It's usually a coordinator, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, or Bob Dice's case, special teams coordinator, Mike O'Shea, special teams coordinator. I think when you look at Calgary, yeah, those decisions need to be made because there's going to be openings, and that organization has been gutted throughout the years. Guy after guy after guy has walked out on that team. Yeah. So I think teams need to. I think Calgary needs to decide what's the priority here. We gotta have that chat with Dickinson. Can this work with you in the both roles? If it can, they gotta tell them we're not. We'll give you another chance, but that's it. Otherwise, we got Plan B.
Plan B to me is Mark Killam.
Yeah,
he is the assistant head coach. He has already been given a bit of a, because he's the assistant head coach, and I believe I want to make sure, yes, that he's the only one that has coach in his title, right? Head coach in his title. I believe he is the guy that's going to be the head coach of the Calgary Stampeders. It won't be announced now, but it will in the off season. It'll be announced. I'm firmly set into that. The only reason that they might not have to do it, David, is I think the rest of the teams, except for Edmonton, I think are set up for their coaches for next year. So there might not be the kind of starvation for a head coach. Like I wouldn't. Which coaches do you think are in trouble that have already not been fired?
Bob Dice.
That's about it.
Right. I don't know what Edmonton's going to do with theirs.
Bob Dice hasn't really done it. Edmonton too, only because will the stopgap measure be enough, right?
Yeah.
But you go any further, and to my mind, I see a very limited opportunity outside of Calgary. But Mark Killam, I think he turned down opportunities last year. He could have gone to Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan was interested in him. There was interest in him, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they added assistant head coach to his title. So we know what he wants, right? Because that title there, they didn't just willy-nilly. Dickinson didn't just willy-nilly give that to him. I think Mark Killam, when people were asking about him being a head coach, that's why I think that he is the next head coach of the Calgary Stampeders.
I think that makes a lot of teams also like to go with the internal options, right? That's the other thing people need to consider.
Well, internal in football is a 50-50 proposition. A lot of other sports they promote from within, but not as much as football. But even if you say forget that, who cares whether they promote from within or not? But promotions happen in football, and those promotions a lot of times yield good numbers. Who would be unhappy with Jarius Jackson's job after he took over? And wherever you go, I mean, Mace. I mean, his first year never a head coach before, and he seems to have done okay. I mean, there's no reason why you can't find somebody who does not have the existing title of head coach today that can't be a head coach. There's no reason to believe that's impossible, that you can't find a guy who isn't a head coach and make him a head coach. We've in the Canadian Football League, the advantages of being an assistant coach or on the coaching staff in the Canadian Football League, the advantage is the game. That's what's different about the Canadian Football League. Going outside the Canadian Football League to get a head coach, boy, are you gambling, because this league has tried it a few times, and we've seen some disasters because they brought in head coaches that know nothing about the Canadian Football League. It ain't just football. The Canadian Football League isn't just football. It's Canadian football, Canadian rules football. So, a guy like Killam is a lot better a choice for Calgary than somebody from outside. And it's nice because here in the Canadian Football League the past few years, a lot of coaches have come out from their ranks, more than has been in the past. We've had more of a, you go back 10 years ago, David, and it was more of a carousel, right? A coach would leave one team and go to the next, go to another, right? We're not seeing that as much in this phase or this time in the Canadian Football League. We're seeing assistant coaches move into the big, they're getting the clipboard, they're getting the whistle and the clipboard because they understand the game.
No, they are getting they are understanding it, and I mean, we just see we've just come organizations just also there's organizations that have gone too comfortable with what they believe is works.
Yeah,
but
change is careful.
change is tough. Of course it is. You always have to second guess whether you're making the right decisions. I know we went a little off topic there, but I think it's all relevant for Calgary and Hamilton.
Absolutely.
Right? Hamilton's been guilty of that. Change after change after change after change. But what has it actually yielded for Hamilton?
I think they're finally settling in on this coach. I really think that they need to, I don't think they're going to change their head coach. I don't think they have anything that says change the head coach.
I'm curious what happens with Chris Jones. Does he stay there? Does he go and look for another gig?
Some of this, I don't remember exactly which TSN person said that, this is an opportunity for Chris Jones to see what he has for next year. There's an assumption from one of the experts that, he's coming back. He's going to be the defensive coordinator next year, which speaks to the position of the head coach, Milanovic, right? That, maybe they know something, they heard something that Milanovic says, can we keep him for next year? That if Milanovic wants him to be the defensive coordinator, and Jones needs to, he wants to have a year where he sits out again because he's still a little, not traumatized, but a guy with that kind of ego, and I don't mean it in a bad way. He's a guy who knows he's a winner, and to have experienced what he did in Edmonton, a place where he won a Grey Cup, that must sting a little, and it must be a taste that he really wants to get out of his mouth. And the best way for him to do it is to go to his roots, which is defense.
Absolutely. Right? Like, so I think for Jones, he just needs to show his value right now.
To himself. He's not the kind of guy that really cares what other people think. But I think there's some introspective, and he's looking into himself and introspectively, because he's a very proud man, and deservedly so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. So it'd be interesting to see how they handle that.
Yeah, look for him to stay in Hamilton. Look for Mark Killam to be the head coach of the Calgary Stampeders. You heard it here first. And I got to tell you, I'm very convinced of that. And all the reasons I'm convinced of it have less to do about any individual in the Calgary Stampeders organization. It has to do with the choir that is, the culture that is in Calgary is going to put pressure on that kind of move being made. And I think he stayed in Calgary, Mark Killam, knowing that he would be the next head coach. Why wouldn't the head coach of the Calgary Stampeders, who's there now, Mr. Dickinson, why wouldn't he say to himself, I really don't want both these jobs. Maybe this isn't working. There aren't many guys that can do this. Maybe back in the day, but it doesn't seem to be working today. Maybe I need to do something for the good of the team. because that's what it's going to come down to. Dickinson's a class act. Don't let anybody ever convince you of anything otherwise. He's a class act. And if he thinks that him bumping himself upstairs permanently and leaving the whistle and the clipboard for somebody else, if anybody thinks he wouldn't do that unselfishly for the Calgary Stampeders, does not know Dave Dickinson. Not for a second.
No, for sure.
Well, anyway, okay. That was all because of the game that was played between Calgary and Hamilton. We don't have much time, but we can very quickly. Montreal and BC. You talked about Montreal not needing the game that much. BC looked good. Vernon Adams, do you think he looked good enough to play the next game?
Absolutely. There's no doubt.
All right. So you figure he'll start the East Center, the West Center.
That was the closest I saw from early season Vernon Adams. Was it perfect? No, there was a couple of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But you saw the confidence in the offense with him in there, and I think that's what they need. They just need to go with the. I think that he's the heartbeat of the team right now. Everyone kind of rallies behind him, and unfortunately for Nathan Rourke, like that was he was kind of the guy that showed up, and not saying that it was his fault because he was somewhere else, but this was always Vernon Adams' team as long as he was with the organization. So I think they play different with him there, and I think they understand that he is the guy to lead them forward. And look, Montreal, as we said, there was nothing to play for, but you don't want either they're not showing teams things ahead of the playoffs,
which is very possible,
or if I'm Jason Moss, you don't want this team to be letting the foot off the gas because as we've seen, it's easy for things to go off, let the gas off, and then, now we got to turn it up again.
Yeah, momentum is not something that can turn on and off.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to get it back going again. I agree with you, Vernon Adams, and I'll add this little nugget. Vernon Adams being a BC Lion is now in his hands. How he does now with the ball under center, what he does right now will determine his future with BC. Now, BC's in an interesting situation. They have a former MOP on the sidelines. They've got a guy who was supposed to be the MOP before he got injured under center. And the curiosity of curiosity, David, for me is, what if he does win the playoff game, but not the Grey Cup? What if he wins the playoff game and the Grey Cup? Now, does that mean that they've got to do something with the other quarterback? Interesting off season, because as much as I talked about coaches, and we're seeing the CFL probably as steady as it's ever been in head coaching positions, but quarterbacks are always. Everybody's hunting for another quarterback. So this is the part about BC and what's going on with BC that I find it's making my brain cook like crazy, because this is probably, to me, the most interesting storyline that we have in the Canadian Football League right now is the Adams recovery and his ability to take back the team that was literally and figuratively handed to another guy.
Well, I honestly, this year's for Vernon Adams. After this, with the money that's committed, it's Nathan Rourke.
Yep.
And I feel more comfortable with Nathan Rourke having time to get himself acclimated into the offense and new guys, and
flush his failure in the NFL, which I don't think he's done yet.
Yeah, he's still talking about it. Every time people are still asking about it, it's still on his brain. He's got to flush that, and now he's here in the CFL. This is his gig.
BC's in a pretty good. I like the position BC's in right now because of possibilities. What kind of trade bait will Adams be if they believe what you just said? If BC believes what you just said, can you imagine if he has a good playoff game? Never mind a Grey Cup, but even a good playoff game, that's going to raise what his value, and the team can do something to improve its stock, however that is, to help make this team more conducive to being the other quarterback's team, which it isn't right now, which you've highlighted, and I don't disagree with it at all.
No, and when I see this, especially with BC, like Ferdinand Adams is in the most favorable position of his career right now because
all the cards in his own hands.
Yeah, because he's gonna have suitors. We talked about Calgary needs a quarterback. Edmonton could be in a position depending on what they decide to do with Trey Ford. Hamilton, we'll see if they go with Bo Levi Mitchell. Do teams look at Vernon Adams and say, you know what? I'd rather give him the chance. I'd rather see what he can do because of what he's done in BC. I don't see him going back to BC after this year just because they've made it clear it's not his team. And when you have that other quarterback around that's led your team and it's supposed to be someone else's team, it's tough to get the guy right.
There's no room for the both of them emotionally on that score. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And what I will say about the Ford thing, I can see Trey Ford being signed to backup money with starter bonuses. You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then they can afford to bring in a guy like Rourke if they give him backup money and starter bonuses. So in other words, if things don't work out, if they get Rourke and he's there, they could keep him there. If they give him backup money, because I don't believe Adams is being paid backup money, which is part of the problem they're dealing with in BC financially, right? Cap wise.
Well, the way I see it with the problem is with Ford, he's shown that he can play games, but can he be a long-term starter? That's the question many are having.
And injuries tend to cut into people's belief in a guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
so
it's not just ability, it's availability.
Exactly, right? And so I think Edmonton, if I'm Trey, I'm getting out of Edmonton personally. They haven't really done, they've never been sold on him as a quarterback.
That's a fair statement, especially when you consider what we've said about him for the years.
Right.
I had more respect for him than the Edmonton Elks has had.
So that's what I think. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. So
a little bit of a merry-go-round. Where does Ford go? There's places that
I think Hamilton will take him.
Calgary.
Hamilton, Calgary are the two that make the most sense. Now, one thing I wanted to figure out, I mean, I don't know what Zach Claros' future will be like too, right? You know, Zach is going to be 37 next year. You know, I don't know what his contract is like after he signed a contract extension through the 2025 season. Does Winnipeg look ahead a little bit? Or do they say, let's punt the decision to 2025? Winnipeg also has his brother. So do they look to say, hey, Trey, come and join your brother? So there's a lot. He'll be another quarterback.
You are dirty, David. That's just dirty pool, man.
I'm just throwing it out there. I've thought about it. Because people have asked me.
I agree with you. Just it's it is what it is. But there's places he could go, and always because of his injury and because he hasn't established that he's a starter, he's only established that he's a good backup, a really good backup with an upside of being a starter. Whoever brings him in can have another guy. They can make him, like I said, they can give him backup money with starter bonuses, right? Depending on how many games he plays, that kind of stuff, right? So if he's got that in his, that kind of contract in his back pocket, and he truly believes in himself, and that this injury thing that he's been going through the past few years will end, and he will be able to overcome these injuries, and the injury he had this year, the one that he had this year, that was off a dirty play in my mind.
Yeah,
that's not the kind of injury that you can blame his body on. That was a terrible hit that took him out. And we know his trajectory was he was doing great. Edmonton could have made the playoffs if he didn't get injured.
Mm-hmm. Also, let me also talk about. I mean, when you look at Edmonton, they also have to figure out who's in charge after this year.
There you go.
That's going to be the big part of his future as well. Because if I'm Trey Ford and those same
To do that, and they have new ownership that's going to have to figure that out.
does the ownership group believe in Trey Ford? Because if they do, I don't know if they can keep the people in charge that have not really shown that level of commitment either.
Absolutely, you're 100% right. Let's spend a little time with Toronto.
Sure.
We spend a lot of time with them, and this time we're not going to spend that much, but we will.
Hey, Frank, I've heard that they finally caught the onside kick. They finally figured it out.
3 times lucky. 3 times lucky. No one should be surprised about something like this. You have an Ottawa team that the team got put back together again. Drew Brown comes back from injury. Ackland comes back. And I really think those are the 2 main players that I think make their offense go. And I think they got into a groove in that game. And the Argos literally, I think they lit their cigars that were in the locker room. They lit them a little early and weren't paying. They really almost, excuse this expression, after smoking a cigar, almost coughed up a win for Ottawa. Not a lung, but they almost coughed up a win for Ottawa.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Where I can understand that there's you celebrate the little things sometimes as teams, the little accomplishments. It's been a tough season. I don't know if that was Toronto's decision, the team's decision. I believe that was somebody within the ownership that decided to bring the cigars in, because I don't think the Argos are paying for all the players to be smoking cigars. Personally, that's my opinion.
I have a rumor who.
I know exactly who it was. We know who it was. It was Mr. Lastman, right? And so the way I see this is, you know what? It's been a hard season. As long as, and I'm sure players on the team are like, look, you can celebrate this, but understand we're right back to work.
Yeah.
Like we can't be happy with what you played great for 3 quarters.
It was Ottawa more than it was Toronto's letting go. I really do, David. I want to make that clear. It was less about Toronto letting up. It was more about Ottawa hitting a groove. Ackland made some catches there that helped turn things around, and Drew Brown is a lot better quarterback than they've had while he was out.
Right? Like, well, the way I see this, Ottawa waited. Ottawa was never in that game until they got a touchdown, and it's almost never happens. Does a team get 2 onside kicks in a row? The first one was luck. The second one was I think nerves and Ottawa realizing, we can make this interesting if we get another one. But let's not also forget that Ottawa played brutal.
Yeah,
Drew Brown was doing okay. Wasn't the 400
back? He's gone 5-6 weeks.
Yeah, right. Like it takes. But like that team, a lot of guys hadn't played, right? But Toronto was playing prevent defense. They were making sure that they're also injured. They were down a lineman, offensive lineman, and they were playing conservative. But you know what? I credit Ottawa because they didn't give up either.
And I'm going to say this before we go: the biggest game next week is irrelevant, like a lot of the games, Hamilton and Ottawa, because of 2 reasons. We've got a team in Hamilton that believes that they're a lot better than they showed this year, and they've got a quarterback who's hit a groove, and Ottawa, on the other hand, has something to prove too. They need to get into playoff mode. So we're going to see a little bit of it. I think we're going to see probably the best game is going to be that Friday night tilt between Hamilton and Ottawa. I'm looking forward to that game.
Yeah, and don't ask Chad Kelly if he doesn't want to play in that game.
We already know he wants to play.
I felt so bad for Sean. I understand where he was going at with the question, but I had a feeling that answer was coming.
Yeah, well, we knew what the answer is going to be, but here's what I think needs to happen, and the reality is that Toronto could truck him out, pacify him, start him in the game, and then pull him in the second half or earlier, right? That's what they're going to have to do, and the excuse they're going to use, as soon as the coach sees that he takes a chance that risks his health, he'll be pulled out. Because they're going to tell him, don't do anything stupid while you're out there. Don't worry about third and long and running the ball. Don't worry about doing that. Let's get your mechanics, get your game in order, play the kind of game, do what you did this week, do some stuff that helps keep you on pace to play the playoff game. But anything you do that risks you playing the next game, you'll be sitting down. And the Argos have to be strong-willed about this, They're not very good. The one thing Dinwiddie doesn't do, and he has a history of it, is he lets his quarterbacks make decisions they shouldn't make, like if they should be interviewed at the end of a loss. He did that with Thompson. He's done it with Kelly. I think that's a mistake. I think that's one of the weaknesses that I think Coach Dinwiddie has. But he knows those guys better than I do. But I don't like that. Not because I want to interview them after the game when they lose, but just to see them have the intestinal fortitude to stand in front of the press and answer the questions because they lost the game, and see that they have the chutzpah to handle the questions.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that.
So we'll see. So they're going to have to stand firm with him. He needs guardrails. He's got to have guardrails. I understand why they don't want to give him guardrails, because he's such a freewheeling great quarterback. Because his best plays have always been the ones that he's done. Under pressure, right? Under unusual pressure.
Mm-hmm.
He's a good quarterback.
He is.
Anyway, listen, thanks for doing this, David.
Thank you, Frank.
Ramble on there. I apologize to the production staff. So for David Morassutti, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk, airing live Mondays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For CFL Talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out SpanglishWorld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.